On February 9, 1960, a local milk delivery driver found an abandoned blue and white International Harvester Travelall parked at a strange angle just before the Turkey Creek Bridge on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. The vehicle was still running and the radio was on, but there was no sign of the driver. He sat in the milk truck for a short time and then began honking his horn, hoping to draw the attention of the driver from wherever they had gone. After waiting for nearly 15 minutes, the milk driver decided there was nothing to do but get into the Travelall and move it out of the way of the lane. Then he went on his way. It was only later that morning, after mentioning the abandoned vehicle to a few of his customers, that he decided to report what he had seen to the Colorado State Patrol. Within hours, an American dynasty found themselves at the center of a mystery that would tear their family apart. This is Monsters. Adolph Coors III was born on January 12, 1915 to Adolph Coors Jr. and Alice May Kistler. Adolph was always known as Ad so as not to be confused with his father or grandfather, who also carried the same name. The original Adolph was a German immigrant who moved to the United States and settled in Golden, Colorado. Golden is located at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains west of Denver. It probably won't surprise you that it got its name as a gold rush town, but while the promise of riches drew people in, it was beer that they stayed for. In 1873, Adolph, along with his friend Jacob Schuler, founded the Golden Brewery. In 1880, Adolph bought out Jacob's shares and renamed it to Coors Brewing Company. It was Golden's limitless supply of Rocky Mountain spring water that first appealed to Adolph as the perfect place to set up a brewery. He was a trained brewer and focused on traditional German brewing methods to set his beer apart from the rest of the market. Despite many significant economic challenges during those early years, Coors beer quickly became a household name, but their biggest trial lay ahead. Between the Prohibition years of 1920 and 1933, Coors was forced to stop brewing beer. By then, Adolph had handed over control of the company to his son, Adolph. It was under Adolph Jr.'s leadership that the company adjusted its business model to establish a porcelain and ceramic division, which is now known as Coors Tech. That company is still in operation today. They also began production of near beer, which we would recognize as low-alcohol beer with less than 0.5% alcohol, as well as using their massive supply of malted barley to make malted milk. The diversification of the business helped the Coors Company survive when most other alcohol manufacturers closed down. By the time Prohibition ended, they had the equipment and distribution channels to get Coors beer back on the shelves within days, which gave them a significant advantage over their competitors. After that, the company went from strength to strength. Outside of business success, Adolph Jr. also had 3 sons, the oldest of which was given his name. After Ad was Bill and then Joe. As firstborn, Ad was promised control of the family business when his father determined he was ready. Adolph was known as a cold man and a strict disciplinarian. He believed each of his sons needed tough love in order to be successful and worthy heirs to continue their family legacy. There was no hugging, no compliments, and no I love yous in their home. Bill would later say, quote, "If you didn't have something worth saying, my father felt you shouldn't say it." The Coors family were also deeply conservative and believed in a clear divide between the haves and the have-nots. In their eyes, not everyone was meant to be equal, otherwise who would run the machines, pack the crates, and keep the brewery going? They saw wealth and power as something you earned, and they had little patience for anyone who thought otherwise. Of course, they had that opinion while their sons inherited a successful business. Despite the limited affection in the boys' lives, the 3 brothers grew into well-rounded and largely respected men. When the time came, they attended college, with Ad following in his father's footsteps and studying engineering at Cornell, and Bill and Joe choosing chemical engineering. After graduation, all three sons took up roles in the family business. Ad started out working in various departments before eventually being promoted as CEO and chairman of the board. Bill led research and development as well as managing the brewery workers, while Joe focused on engineering, production, and Coors tech. You might not know that Coors Brewing Company was behind the invention of the aluminum can. Prior to 1959, beer was manufactured in a steel can. Steel is heavy, prone to rust, and difficult to recycle. It was Ad's brother Bill who saw the advantages of aluminum over steel because of its lighter weight, resistance to rust, and ability to be easily recycled. Bill established Coors Container, which became the largest aluminum can producing plant in the world. Coors also initiated a recycling program offering a penny for each can returned, long before recycling became mainstream. That move revolutionized the international beverage industry, and the Penny for Your Can initiative is still in operation today. By the 1950s, Coors was producing 1 million barrels of beer a year, which made it one of the largest regional breweries in the country. Despite its success, Coors famously limited its distribution to just 11 western states in order to maintain quality and exclusivity. It was only in 1986 that Coors began distributing nationally. The decision to limit supply, like every decision, was made by Adolph and Adolph alone. He ran the Coors company with an iron grip. He was a no-nonsense leader who believed in discipline, precision, and results. Success wasn't something he celebrated, it was simply the baseline expectation of his sons and every one of his employees. Ad, Bill, and Joe weren't given any special treatment, and if they ever got called into his office, it probably meant they'd made a mistake. The brothers shared a simple office where they would discuss the daily operations of the business and problem-solve what they could to avoid escalating issues to their father. Taking an issue to him meant admitting failure, and that was something none of them wanted to do. Despite Ad's growing leadership role within the company, his father wasn't ready to fully hand over the reins, and he had to earn every inch of authority he was given. Ad felt ready to be in charge, except for one thing which was holding him back. Ad had a stutter. Taking over control meant managing employees, meeting with suppliers, and commanding a boardroom. For the most part, Ad could keep his stutter hidden, but when he was under pressure, it would creep in and leave him practically speechless. Beyond that, and to his father's utmost shame, Ad was also allergic to beer. Ironic. Although Ad respected his role in the family business and intended to take over from his father when the time came, brewing was not his dream. He was a country boy at heart. He wanted open space, fresh air, and a life away from boardrooms and factories. As heir to the Coors kingdom, he was never going to be able to fully realize that dream, but the next best thing was to buy and stock a ranch so in his downtime he could live the way he wanted. After living in the suburbs of Denver for years, Ad and his wife Mary moved their 4 children into their dream home on a 480-acre or 200-hectare ranch in Willow Springs, just 12 miles or 20 kilometers away from the factory. It was a big change, but one he'd been working towards for as long as he could remember. Ad was easygoing and down to earth. He wasn't as extroverted as Bill or as intense as his father. He was just a friendly, quiet guy who got along with most people. During the 1950s and 60s, the company had a lot of trouble with unions. Bill and Joe took charge in dealing with negotiations and pushing back against union demands for more pay and better conditions. How noble. To the Coors family, unions were just troublemakers trying to upset the natural order. The way they saw it, success came from hard work and knowing your place. If someone didn't agree with that, they could be replaced. Ad stayed in the background for most of the union conflicts. He wasn't the face of the negotiations, and despite being one of the Coors family, most workers respected him as a fair and reasonable leader and someone they could actually talk to. One worker would later describe Ad by saying, quote, "His most outstanding trait is that he's not outstanding. Often he is mistaken by new employees and suppliers as a run-of-the-mill employee. None of them would ever dream he's Adolph III, chairman of the company." The feeling toward his father wasn't the same. When Adolph got wind of a potential strike by the electricians, who were the backbone of keeping the factory going, he called Ad into his office and told him he should fire every one of them. Ad might have held the same views about the unions, but he expressed them differently. The brothers took a more strategic approach to keeping the peace. After all, the number one rule of working at Coors was to keep the plant going at any cost, and without the electricians, production would grind to a halt. One of the side effects of the ongoing tension between Coors' leadership and the unions was a growing fear that a disgruntled employee might seek revenge against the family. Adolph was particularly worried that he or one of his family members would be kidnapped, and he had good reason to worry. In 1933, his best friend had been kidnapped and held for 2 weeks until a ransom was paid. That case made the kidnapper the first ever public enemy number 1 by the newly formed Federal Bureau of Investigation. When the kidnapper was finally caught, authorities found a handwritten list of potential victims in his pocket. Adolph Coors Jr. was on that list. 7 months later, Adolph was targeted again. That time it was prohibition agents who planned to kidnap him for a ransom. Fortunately, they were caught before they could follow through. Even though decades had passed, Adolph's fear of kidnapping never went away. He insisted his sons keep a low profile and avoid drawing attention to their family wealth. He even used that as an excuse to pay them modest salaries, which were far less than what the heirs of other millionaire families received. All members of the Coors family lived a relatively middle-class lifestyle, at least on the surface. The only real indicators of their wealth were their memberships at Colorado's most exclusive country clubs. Adolph also never issued his sons any shares in the company, meaning they had no real say in major decisions. As tensions with workers and the general public grew, so did Adolph's concerns that he or one of his family members might be targeted. And it's not so much that he was worried about losing someone, more that he didn't want to spend any of his hard-earned money to get them back. He insisted on tight security measures and succession plans in case the worst happened. But despite all his planning, Adolph was about to find himself at the center of the very thing he feared the most. On Tuesday, February 9, 1960, Ad woke early, worked out, and checked on his horses, just like he did every morning. When he got back inside, his wife Mary had made him a coffee and they chatted about the day and the week ahead. At 7:55 a.m., he put on a tan baseball cap, his favorite navy blue windbreaker, kissed Mary goodbye, and got into his International Harvester Travelall to head to work. The kids had already left on the school bus and the ranch was quiet as he drove down the winding road towards the highway. Just a few weeks earlier, his typical 12-mile route had been interrupted by roadworks, which meant that he had to take a different road to get to work. That took him in the direction of Turkey Creek Bridge. As Ad approached the wooden slats, he noticed a vehicle parked across the one-lane bridge blocking his path. It was a canary yellow Mercury sedan, and the driver of the vehicle was standing to the side with the hood up. It was clear to Ad that the man had broken down, so he rolled down his window and asked if he could help. They figured they could push the car out of the way and he would give him a ride to a service station on the way to the factory. The man seemed relieved to have some assistance. Ad got out of his car and began walking towards the Mercury, but as he stepped towards the rear of the vehicle, the man pulled out a pistol. He told Ad to get in the back of the car and put on the leg irons which were lying on the seat. Ad had been shocked to see the gun, but he was not the kind of guy to go down or get in a stranger's car without a fight. Ad was 6'1" or 185 centimeters and 185 pounds or 83 kilograms, which made him about the same size as the man holding the gun. But as he sized up the situation, he decided that he had the advantage, so he lunged forward and grabbed for the man's gun. The man pushed back and they wrestled against the railings of the bridge. In the commotion, both men's hats flew off their heads and into the waters of the creek below. Ad's glasses also fell off and slid in between the slats of the roadway. At some point, Ad got the upper hand and he made a dash for his car, but his assailant was still holding the gun. Moments later, 2 shots rang out in the valley. It was 10:20 a.m. when the local milk delivery driver found the abandoned Travelall blocking the Turkey Creek Bridge, and he reported it to the Colorado State Patrol about 15 minutes later. By then, the morning had passed at Coors Brewing without much concern. Adolph was on vacation in Hawaii with his wife, so the brothers were more relaxed than usual. The only thing on the agenda was a 10:30 meeting for Bill, Joe, and Ad to discuss the latest union threats. As the time approached, Ad's secretary Joanne thought it was unusual that he hadn't called to tell her he was running late. It wasn't unusual for Ad to come into the office after 9 o'clock, especially if something happened with his cattle on the ranch, but he always called to let her know. As 10:30 came and went, Bill became increasingly frustrated with his brother's lack of punctuality. At 10:45, he asked Joanne to call Ad at home and tell him they were starting the meeting without him. Mary answered Joanne's call and was surprised to hear that her husband hadn't arrived for work yet. As far as she knew, Ad didn't have any additional stops to make on the way. She told Joanne she would call the feed store, knowing that Ad sometimes dropped in there on his way, got to talking, and lost track of time. But there was an edge of anxiety in her voice. Both women knew that it was out of character for Ad to be sidetracked for 2 hours without letting someone know where he was. Mary told Joanne to call her as soon as she heard anything, and she promised to do the same. While Mary called the feed store, Joanne checked in with Coors Tech and the main Coors warehouse to see if Ad was on site somewhere else, but no one had seen him since the day before. Bill and Joe went on with their meeting, unaware that no one could get a hold of Ad. Joanne called local hospitals to see if Ad had been brought in. That's when the head of the Coors traffic department walked into the office. The Coors manufacturing plant covered such a large plot of land that they had a whole traffic department to manage deliveries and the flow of trucks who picked up the 1,000,000 barrels of beer they produced annually. The man told Joanne that he had received a call from the Colorado State Patrol about an abandoned vehicle which was registered to the Coors company. He recognized the plate as belonging to Ad's Travelall. As soon as he got off the phone with the State Patrol, the traffic department manager walked upstairs and informed Bill and Joe. Bill dialed the number for the State Patrol and learned about the milkman's report, which had come through at 11:35 a.m. Soon after, a patrol officer had been sent to Turkey Creek Bridge to determine if the vehicle was still there. When the officer asked Bill if he had heard from Ad, he said he hadn't turned up for work as expected and no one had heard from him all morning. Bill wanted to talk to the patrol officer who found the vehicle, but instead of being patched through, he decided to take Joe and head to the bridge to see Ad's car for himself. When Bill and Joe arrived at the scene at 12:40 p.m., they saw nothing out of the ordinary except their brother's vehicle, pulled over to the side of the road with no one inside it. There were 2 officers already at the bridge. One talked with the brothers while the other peered over the bridge and took a look down the side of the creek. After a couple of minutes, he walked over to the brothers to show them 2 hats he found lying near the bank. One was a tan baseball cap and the other was a brown fedora. The officer held them up and asked the brothers if they looked familiar. Both immediately recognized the tan cap and confirmed that it belonged to Ad. Neither recognized the fedora. They couldn't be sure it didn't belong to Ad, but when they turned the hats over, they discovered that the cap was size 7 1/8 and the fedora was size 7 3/8. The officers asked Bill and Joe to join them in searching the creek bed, the bridge, and the surrounding area for any sign of Ad. Aside from the hats, the only thing they found was a set of tire tracks in the gravel, leading east towards State Road 70. As they all stood looking at the tracks, it was Bill who broke the silence, saying, quote, "It looks to me like there's only one explanation. Ad's been kidnapped." One of the officers agreed. The other was sure there must be some other explanation. Maybe Ad had stopped to help someone and they had driven them to the hospital, but everyone knew if that had happened, he would have called by now. In the end, there's no denying that everything pointed to foul play. The only silver lining was that if Ad had been kidnapped, he was still alive and all it would take to get him back was some money. Joe made the short drive to Ad's home to inform Mary of what had happened, but as he walked towards her front door and saw her frightened face, he didn't have the heart to tell her everything he knew. She had been waiting for news about her husband since Joanne's call earlier that morning, and seeing her brother-in-law in the driveway could only mean something bad had happened. All Joe said was that Ad was missing and they had found his car by Turkey Creek. He told her to get her coat and shoes and he would take her to talk to the officers. She quickly grabbed her things as well as a recent picture of Ad and jumped into Joe's car. During the short drive, she tried to get more information out of Joe, but he still didn't want to be the one to tell her what they really thought was going on. Then she asked if Ad had been kidnapped. All he would say is, "I don't know," and try not to worry. At 1:15, Joe and Mary arrived at the bridge. She saw the travelall and she was asked if she recognized either of the hats found by the creek. She pointed to the baseball cap as being the same one Ad had worn out of the house that morning. Then she answered a string of questions about when Ad had left and whether she had seen anything out of the ordinary recently. She couldn't think of anything that stood out. As she handed over the photo of Ad, she heard another officer yell out, "Over here." He was standing next to Bill and it was clear they had found something. Joe and Bill made eye contact and Joe told Mary to go back and sit in the car where it was warm. They didn't want her to see what it was. It was the lieutenant who first noticed something off about the dirt on the side of the bridge. When he pointed it out to Bill, Joe, and the other officers who were starting to arrive at the scene, they recognized what he was pointing at: blood. To the untrained eye, like those belonging to Bill and Joe, it was just a few droplets a few inches in diameter. But to the officers, there was more than enough to indicate something serious had happened there. The blood had seeped through the dirt and into the wooden planks before congealing into a viscous sludge. When Joe got back to his car with Mary inside, she asked what they'd found. He told her about the blood. When she started crying, he told her, quote, "It wasn't that much really. It looked like a man had been on his hands and knees, maybe bleeding from a hit on his head." As he drove her home, Joe told Mary not to worry. He would call a doctor and get her something to calm her down. Meanwhile, Sheriff Art Wormuth directed his deputies to begin a fingertip search of the Turkey Creek area. Within hours, more than 150 people were involved in the search, including 73 deputies, Colorado State Patrol officers, volunteers, and dog teams with bloodhounds. Divers were also brought in to search the murky creek bed. The response was massive, oversized even, but it wasn't just any old member of the public who had gone missing. It was Adolph Coors, heir to a multi-million-dollar beer empire. The sheriff needed to be seen doing everything possible to bring him home safely. But Sheriff Wormuth had other reasons for moving so quickly. He wanted the fame that came with a high-profile case which was sure to make national and even international news. Even better if he was seen to be the one who solved it. His ego meant that no resource was spared. A police photographer took detailed images of the travelall as well as nearly every inch of the bridge and creek. Forensic samples of the dirt and gravel were taken for blood typing and planks from the bridge were removed and taken as evidence. As they worked, one officer took a break on the bridge and lit up a cigarette. As he looked down to where his ash fell, he noticed something glinting between two slats of the bridge. It was a pair of glasses. When they were removed, they found that one of the lenses was broken. The optometrist named on the arm of the glasses confirmed he had made them for Ad. Meanwhile, news of Ad's disappearance was spreading quickly. News reporters rushed to the bridge and captured shots of Ad's abandoned car, the heavy police presence, and the searchers. Reporters also tried to access the ranch, but they were stopped by sheriff's deputies who had been posted to protect Mary. Everyone was told not to make any comment until they knew more, but the sheriff himself wasn't so coy. He gave interviews confirming that Adolph Coors had likely been kidnapped and he was sparing no expense to track down his captors. So he was doing his job. What a hero. While the search continued, Mary was at home, torn between worrying about Ad and worrying about the kids. They'd be home from school any minute, and she had no idea what to tell them. She paced the room, wringing her hands as her mind raced. She had already taken a pill given to her by her doctor, but it hadn't made any difference. Joe was uncomfortable with displays of emotion, and he told Mary she should take another pill and get some rest. But Mary didn't want to go to sleep. She said, quote, "I need to keep my wits about me in case there's news." In the end, Mary decided honesty was the best policy. When the children arrived home and noticed all of the police officers and their uncle hovering about with worried faces, they knew something was wrong. Mary told them their father was missing and that the police thought he might have been kidnapped. She reassured them by saying that Ad was strong and that all they had to do was pay the bad people some money and he would be home before they knew it. If only it was that simple. The police and Mary agreed it was best for the children to stay at Joe's house where their aunt could take care of them. There was a real fear that the kidnappers might be watching Ad's home, and no one wanted to risk putting the children in harm's way. As they left, the oldest asked, quote, "Daddy's going to be okay, isn't he, Mama?" Mary replied, quote, "I hope so, but we may never see your father again. We have to be prepared just in case." When the children looked shocked, Mary tried to take her words back, but the weight of Ad's disappearance was already too much for her to manage. She fainted right there in front of them. By the time she came around, the children were gone. She took the second pill, washed it down with a glass of gin, and went to bed. Now all they had to do was wait for the ransom. Oh, and get a hold of Adolph in Hawaii to tell him what was going on. It was Joe who had the unenviable task of interrupting their father's vacation to let him know his namesake had been kidnapped. Adolph was a stoic man, but even the staunchest people will show some sign of emotion when something tragic happens, especially to a loved one. But that wasn't the case for Adolph. To him, a kidnapping was merely a business transaction. Pay the money in exchange for his son. No emotion needed. Crying or getting upset wouldn't get them anywhere. However, he did agree to cut their trip short and they changed their flight home to the following day. By then, the FBI had become involved in the case. The FBI was started in 1908 as a small group of investigators working under the Department of Justice. Initially, they were mostly involved in crimes involving corruption and land fraud. By the time Adolph Coors III went missing in 1960, the FBI was the go-to for kidnappings thanks to the Lindbergh Law, which was passed after the abduction of Charles Lindbergh's infant son in 1932. That law meant that kidnapping was a federal crime if the victim was taken across state lines. But given that Ad had been missing for less than 24 hours, there was no way of knowing for sure if he had been taken across state lines. So at first the FBI was involved in the case in an advisory capacity. However, by the following evening, the decision was made that the FBI would lead the investigation. They had the resources and expertise to handle a case like this, but there was more to it than that. J. Edgar Hoover also needed a win to prove the relevance of his agency's expanding scope. There was nothing better than the prompt resolution of a high-profile disappearance to give him that. Plus, J. Edgar Hoover was friends with Adolph Jr., which meant there was extra pressure to bring the case to a prompt and positive conclusion. The involvement of the FBI didn't go over so well with the local sheriff. He wanted his name in lights next to Ad's, and he wasn't going to step out of the spotlight on anyone's account, but he didn't really have a say in it. As agents rolled into Golden, they were dispatched to talk to Bill and Joe, who had returned to run the Coors factory, as well as interviewing employees, witnesses, and Mary. Mary gave an extremely detailed description of every item of clothing Ad was wearing when he left the house that day, right down to the sizes and brands. When she was asked again if she could think of anything unusual happening in the previous days or weeks, she suddenly remembered something. She had seen men in a yellow car driving up and down the lane outside their home. The children had seen it too, and so had Ad. All of them had put it down to poachers scoping out the land for game. The area was a popular spot for deer hunting, even though signs on all of the properties in the area warned poachers to stay away. When agents asked other residents about the yellow car, they found several people who recalled seeing it as well. A maid had seen it the day before the disappearance, and another confirmed the yellow car was a Mercury. One witness had even remembered the first couple of numbers of the plate, AT62. Witnesses also described having heard gunshots around the time Ad disappeared. One woman was able to pinpoint the sound to that of a .38 caliber weapon. But no one had actually seen another vehicle at the bridge, and no one had seen Ad that morning or witnessed any altercation. While agents interviewed everyone with even a remote connection to the area, phone taps were set up on Mary and Ad's telephone as well as at Adolph's home. Agents were also stationed at the post office to intercept all mail addressed to the family in case it contained a ransom note. While the FBI tried to keep information about the case under wraps to avoid tipping off Ad's abductors, the sheriff was more than happy to answer reporters' questions. He revealed that the investigators were looking for a green Dodge vehicle which had been seen near Ad's home prior to the abduction. That was in contrast to the vehicle that the FBI were actually pursuing. He just didn't know that. He said everyone believed Ad was still alive and being held somewhere, and they were very close to finding him. When he was asked where they believed Ad was being held, the sheriff was very clear that he was most likely within the state of Colorado, which was a not-so-subtle dig at the unnecessary involvement of the FBI on his territory. Sheriff Wormuth may have been overstating the success of the search so far, but he wasn't lying when he said everyone believed Ad was alive. Joe, Bill, and Adolph firmly believed that Ad would be returned. A dead victim doesn't pay well for a kidnapper, but Mary wasn't so sure. She was doing her best to stay positive, but something told her Ad wasn't coming home. However, her hopes were renewed when the FBI intercepted a ransom note on the same day they took over the case. It read, quote, "Mrs. Coors, your husband has been kidnapped. His car is by Turkey Creek. Call the police or FBI, he dies. Cooperate, he lives. Ransom, $200,000 in 10s and $300,000 in 20s. There will be no negotiating. Bills, used, non-consecutive, unrecorded, unmarked. Warning, we will know if you call the police or record the serial numbers. Directions, place money and this letter and envelope in one suitcase or bag. Have 2 men with a car ready to make the delivery. When all set, advertise a tractor for sale in Denver Post Section 69. Sign Ad King Ranch, Fort Lupton. Wait at NA 94455 for instructions after Ad appears. Deliver immediately after receiving call. Any delay will be regarded as a stall to set up a stakeout. Understand this, Adolph's life is in your hands. We have no desire to commit murder. All we want is that money. If you follow the instructions, he will be released unharmed within 48 hours after the money is received." The number they said to wait at was a phone number. In 1960, many places in the U.S. used 2 letters and 5 numbers as a phone number. In Atlantic City, your number might be AC45876. They were phased out in favor of fully numeric numbers starting in the 60s. There was no question that Mary was going to comply with the kidnapper's demands. Adolph agreed to pay the money, but he wanted some assurance. He said, quote, "I want my son if he's alive. If he's dead, I want his body, and I want his murderers executed. And if you have to give them the money, I want every penny of it back." The FBI made all of the necessary arrangements and posted the advertisement in the local paper as requested. The plan was to make the drop and have agents stationed in the area to catch whoever picked up the ransom money, but the newspaper wouldn't be published for a few days, and in the meantime, the FBI forensic lab wanted to learn all they could from the letter itself. The typewritten note became the central focus of the investigation. Investigators knew it was legitimate as the post stamp indicated it had been sent before news of the kidnapping had made the paper. The letter had a distinct typeface and was written on paper with an uncommon watermark. Experts were able to identify that the ransom note had been typed on Eaton's Diamond White Bond Berkshire paper using a Royalite portable typewriter. They also found that the typewriter had a distinctive defect in the way the letter S was typed. The experts were sure that if the machine was recovered, it could be positively connected to the ransom note. With the unique paper and specific model of typewriter identified, all they had to do was figure out who had purchased them both. Meanwhile, agents continued asking for sightings of the Yellow Mercury. They used the partial plate number provided by one of the witnesses to narrow down the number of Mercuries with those 4 digits to just 4 in the state of Colorado. One by one, they visited the registered addresses to find out how many of them were yellow. After eliminating the first 3, the 4th car on the list led them to a boarding house on Pearl Street in Denver. It was registered to a Walter Osborne. An agent approached the landlady and asked if Walter Osborne was a current resident. She told them he was, or at least he had been, until he moved out in a hurry a few days earlier. When asked exactly what day he left, she told them Wednesday, February 10th, the day after Ad was abducted. The landlady shared that she was surprised that Walter had left because he had been there for 4 years and had just paid his rent for the full month of February. She also said he had gone in a hurry and left a lot of personal belongings in his room. She had cleaned out the room and put the items in her garage, thinking that he would return at some point to collect them. The only other information she was able to share was that Walter had said he was going back to school at the University of Colorado in Boulder. The agents didn't know anything about Walter other than that he drove a yellow Mercury with a plate that matched one seen in the area of Ad's ranch, and that he had left in a hurry just 1 day after the abduction. It wasn't much to go on, but there was a good possibility that Walter might be their guy. They collected the belongings from the landlady's garage and asked her one final question. Had she ever seen a typewriter in his room? She recalled that she had. At 5 p.m. on February 13th, the ad for the John Deere tractor was published in the Denver Post as per the ransom note. Now all anyone could do was wait. At 10:30 that night, the phone rang at Ad and Mary's house. She answered while agents listened in. The caller told her he had her husband and he wanted $60,000 in used $20 bills to be delivered in a briefcase to the old sawmill on the outskirts of town. Mary realized immediately that the amount was different from the ransom note, which demanded $500,000. That would be more than $5 million in today's money. Mary asked the caller about the difference, and the caller hung up. That was the first of many calls and letters Mary received over the coming days. Her house was bombarded with fake ransom letters and piggyback calls demanding money in exchange for the return of her husband. No matter what time of day or night the calls came through, Mary would be forced to wake up and answer, just in case it was the one call she was waiting for, but none of them were. By then, Mary was barely holding on. She was existing on a diet of cigarettes, gin, and sedatives, but nothing took the edge off of her pain. As hours and then days passed, she began to feel more hopeless that there would be a positive resolution. Then her despair turned into resentment. She was feeling claustrophobic with the intense police presence around her all day and all night, and she believed that it was their presence which was stopping the kidnappers from making contact. She also desperately missed her children. She could only leave the house to see them for a couple of hours at a time in case the call came through while she was out. In the end, Mary asked her lawyer to post a statement in the papers asking all law enforcement to immediately withdraw from her home and from the investigation itself. The FBI had no intention of agreeing to her demand, but they made a public show of backing off just in case she was right. The day after the ad was posted in the paper was Valentine's Day. The day after that, Mary got a knock at her front door from a delivery man. He had a parcel for Mary and he apologized for not getting it to her the day before. Inside the box was a jewelry box with a small card which read, quote, "Happy Valentine's Day, sweetheart. You are and always will be my Valentine. Love forever, Ad." He had organized the gift just a day before he was abducted. While Mary waited for a call, agents were still trying to track down the buyer of the products which had been used to write the ransom note. After speaking with the manufacturer of the typewriter, they were given a list of stores in Colorado which sold the specific model identified. Unfortunately, the list was long and it would take months to track down every sale in the state. In the meantime, the FBI focused on finding evidence that either proved or disproved that Walter Osborne was their man. After tracking down his workplace, they found a previous employer who had issued Walter an insurance policy. That policy named the beneficiary as Joseph Corbett. When agents spoke to Joseph Corbett, he told them he didn't know a Walter Osborne, but the description of the man from the landlady sounded like it could be his son, Joseph Corbett Jr. When agents pulled his file, they hit the jackpot. Joseph Corbett Jr. was born on October 25, 1928 in Seattle, Washington. He was the second child to his parents who had lost their only son 20 months earlier when the boy was 6 years old. That son was also named Joseph Corbett Jr., and when their second son was born, his parents just gave him the same name, which is a little weird. To not give your new child his own identity and just labeling him a replacement for your deceased child probably didn't help his mental health overall. Joseph was an incredibly intelligent child with a genius-level IQ. He was in the debate club, German club, and science club, played soccer and softball, and had a job throughout high school while also achieving excellent grades. He was an extrovert who made friends easily, and even though he was incredibly smart, he never put in that much effort, probably because he didn't need to. After graduating from high school, Joseph enrolled to study physics at the University of Washington after scoring a 91 out of 99 on his entrance exam. As a student, he set up a typing business to pay his school fees. In those days, students didn't want to type out their own essays, so they would pay Joseph to put it together for them. Joseph told his college friends he wanted to be a doctor, and they had no reason to think he wouldn't be able to achieve that goal. But one incident changed the entire trajectory of Joseph's life. On June 7, 1949, his mother fell from her kitchen balcony onto an iron well grate. 5 days later, she passed away in the hospital. Joseph was in his final year of college with a promising future, but after his mother's death, he dropped out and he never went back. Instead, he moved to San Francisco, got a series of low-paying jobs, stopped socializing, and became a monster. On December 22, 1950, Joseph shot Air Force Sergeant Alan Lee Reed twice in the back of the head. Joseph was only implicated in the crime when his father called the police to say he hadn't heard from his son in a few days and he wanted them to do a welfare check. Joseph lived in a boarding house, and his landlady gave the officers a description of the vehicle she'd seen him driving as well as the license plate number. That plate matched the vehicle that had been found at the scene of Alan's murder. When Joseph was finally picked up on January 13, 1951, he was driving a stolen car and had a .32 caliber revolver and a .38 caliber automatic pistol in the back. One of those weapons matched the gun that had been used to shoot Alan. Joseph initially denied any involvement in the murder, but when Alan's blood type was matched to blood splatter on clothing in Joseph's room, he said he killed Alan in self-defense after the man went for his gun. However, the police believed it was a robbery gone wrong, as Alan's watch and wallet were missing. Joseph was smart enough to figure that a jury would probably agree, so he negotiated a deal which gave him a sentence of 5 years to life in exchange for pleading guilty to second-degree murder. Alan's murder established that Joseph's character had completely changed from his younger days, back when he was known as an extrovert and friendly guy who got along with everyone. But those who knew him in San Francisco described him as reserved, cagey, and a loner. He didn't have any friends and he always preferred to work the night shift to avoid interacting with anyone. A former roommate told officers that Joseph had an obsession with firearms and he usually had at least 4 or 5 in his possession at any one time. He also owned hundreds of books about physics, mathematics, psychology, and criminology. Joseph was initially sent to San Quentin to serve his sentence, which had been fixed at 10 years. After being an exemplary prisoner, he was transferred to a low-security prison in Chino. On August 1, 1955, Joseph walked away from the prison in the middle of the night, not as a free man, but as an escapee. Joseph made his way to Los Angeles, where the Salvation Army helped him begin his new life. He got a new job, a new place to stay, and a new name, Walter Osborne. After a while, he moved on to Denver and settled into the boarding house on Pearl Street. It didn't take him long to get another night shift job, which allowed him to go unnoticed by almost everyone. When FBI agents looking into Joseph's past realized he had been sent away for murder once before, it wasn't a stretch to believe he could be the man responsible for Ad's abduction. There was just one thing that didn't make sense. The point of a kidnapping is usually to extort money from the victim's family, so why hadn't Joseph made contact to get his reward? The answer to that question would take many months and many miles to answer. In the meantime, on the night of February 17th, the fire department in Atlantic City was called to reports of a burning vehicle. They reached the car within minutes and before it was completely destroyed by the blaze. The vehicle's license plate had been removed, but the serial number under the hood was still visible. When the flames were completely doused, the fire chief wrote the number down as well as noting that it was a pale yellow 51 or 52 Mercury sedan. A search of the VIN showed that the registered owner was Walter Osborne from Colorado, a person who was wanted by the FBI in connection to a kidnapping. Turns out Joseph knew the feds were onto him and he thought that burning his getaway car would cover his tracks. Instead, it confirmed to the FBI that Joseph was their man. They wasted no time adding Joseph Corbett and his long list of aliases to the top of the most wanted list. He was the 127th criminal to reach such an achievement. 1.5 million posters of Joseph's face were placed inside bus stops, schools, and newsstands across the United States, Mexico, and Canada. J. Edgar Hoover commented on the case to say that most criminals were apprehended within 178 days of making the list. Despite the publicity about the latest big-name criminal, the FBI refused to confirm if Joseph Corbett was responsible for Coors' abduction. The hunt for Joseph had gone interstate, but back home in Colorado, all anyone wanted to know was what happened to Ad. By then, it was widely accepted that Ad was probably dead, but Mary seemed to be the only one who would say it out loud. 2 weeks had passed since her husband was taken, and while the FBI had the name and face of his likely abductor, if the kidnapper was on the run somewhere in Atlantic City, he probably wasn't dragging a 6'2" man around with him. She was resigned to the fact that her husband was no longer alive, so she brought the kids home and tried to make life as normal for them as she could under the circumstances. As winter in Colorado turned into spring and then summer, the call Mary was waiting for never came. After a while, news reports about Ad's disappearance dwindled. The Coors plant went on as usual, with Bill and Joseph taking over their brother's responsibilities, and friends who had supported Mary during the initial stages carried on with their own lives. But the FBI hadn't given up on finding their man. Agents continued to pursue the typewriter angle. After interviewing staff at the list of stores the manufacturer had provided, a worker at the May D&F store in Denver gave them what they were looking for. He recalled having sold the specific model a couple of weeks before Ad's disappearance. The sale had stuck in his mind because the customer had paid in cash. The name of the customer was William Chiffins, which was a known alibi of Joseph Corbett. When the clerk was shown a photo of Joseph, he confirmed they were one and the same person. They did the same with the paper used in making the ransom note. Once again, they were able to find a store clerk who remembered selling the paper to a man with slanted front teeth, just like those belonging to Joseph. The FBI then believed that once they apprehended Joseph, they would have enough evidence to prove he was responsible for Ad's kidnapping. And it wasn't a matter of if they would get a break, just when. It was on September 11, 1960, 7 months after Ad's disappearance, that they got that break. That day, a keen hunter headed up to the Pike National Forest in Sedalia, just south of Denver, to practice target shooting. He chose an area near Devil's Head Peak where locals often dumped their garbage. It might not have smelled great, but it provided plenty of targets. As he scrambled down the slope towards the dump area, he spotted a pair of trousers on the trail. When he picked them up, the pants made a jingling sound. In the pocket was a penknife with the inscription ACIII. It took a few moments for the man to realize what those initials stood for, but then it clicked. Everyone in the state knew about the disappearance of Adolph Coors III. He immediately left the area and spoke to one of his friends who also happened to be a police officer. Within an hour, he was leading carloads of FBI agents to the location where he found the knife. Over the next few days, agents retrieved several items of clothing which matched the description of what Ad was wearing on the day he disappeared. Each item was shown to Mary, who was asked to confirm if they belonged to her husband. She was certain that they did. One of them was the navy blue windbreaker Ad had put on as he walked out the door. The jacket had 2 distinct bullet holes in the back. Several human bones were also discovered near the dump site, including 9 ribs, a sternum, 2 clavicles, a left humerus and radius, a fibula, 6 thoracic and 3 cervical vertebrae, and 2 scapula, or shoulder blades. The shoulder blades showed damage which the coroner determined were consistent with 2 high-velocity objects passing through them. In other words, bullet holes. Investigators believed that wild animals had scattered the remains, making it difficult to determine exactly who they belonged to. The size of the bones matched Ad's physical description, and the presence of his penknife, his watch, and clothing belonging to him made them believe the remains were almost certainly his. To convict someone for murder, though, they were going to need something more definitive. After several days of searching, a skull was discovered near the dump site. Ad's dentist was asked to examine the jaw and compare it with his dental records. They were a match. The discovery brought to an end at least one aspect of the case. Ad was dead. The science of the time meant it was impossible to determine exactly when he had been murdered, but the amount of blood found on the bridge as well as the 2 bullet holes in Ad's clothing meant he had likely been killed on the bridge during a failed abduction attempt. Investigators believed that Ad had been threatened by a man with a gun on his way to work. He had tried to overcome or escape his attacker, but he was shot twice in the back. His abductor still wanted money, so he shoved Ad's body in the back of his car, dumped it in the mountains, and posted the letter. But something spooked him that night, and the next day he panicked and went on the run. The FBI now had many of the answers they were looking for. The only thing left to do was find the man responsible. The Coors family had spent months searching for answers about Ad's fate, but they wouldn't have to wait anywhere near as long for the person responsible for that fate to be found. On October 25, 1960, a man in Toronto, Canada came forward to say he had information about a man wanted by the FBI. The day before, he had seen Joseph's photo in the Reader's Digest and recognized him as an ex-colleague. When he was interviewed by the FBI, he told them he knew the man in the photos as Walter Osborne. Their employer gave FBI agents the address Joseph had provided on his new employee card. The boarding house owner said that the man he knew as Walter had disappeared a month earlier without leaving a forwarding address. The next day, the FBI received a call from another boarding house owner, that time in Winnipeg. He too had seen Joseph's face in the Reader's Digest and recognized him as a tenant going by the name Ian McIntosh. Agents rushed to Winnipeg, hot on Joseph's tail. They were notified of a bad check he had given to a Hertz rental company when he took off in a red convertible Pontiac. A staff member at Hertz told the FBI the man had asked for directions to Vancouver. Directions from Winnipeg to Vancouver? Go west? Vancouver being a port city, agents knew they were in a race against the clock to arrest Joseph before he boarded a ship and left the country. On October 29th, police officers in Vancouver were given a briefing by the FBI about Joseph. They were shown pictures of him and the stolen Pontiac he was believed to be driving. By chance, one of the officers had seen that very same vehicle parked outside a local boarding house a week earlier. He left the briefing and went to the property on his own, just in case he was mistaken. When he showed the landlady a photo of Joseph, she identified him as a current resident going by the name Thomas Wainwright. She said he had just been downstairs to grab the daily paper before heading back to his room. The officer rushed outside to a phone box and called his superiors. Minutes later, the building was flooded with officers and agents from the FBI. At 9:45 a.m., Joseph answered a knock on his door to find himself face to face with an FBI agent. He immediately put his hands in the air and said, quote, "I'm your man. I'm not armed. I give up." It had been 263 days since Ad's abduction and murder and 214 days since Joseph made the FBI's most wanted list. Amongst Joseph's personal belongings, officers found a fully loaded 9mm pistol. They also discovered a hat size 7 3/8. Given that Joseph was arrested in Canada, the first order of business was to organize extradition. Joseph indicated that he was going to fight being extradited back to the US, but when he appeared in court, he told the judge he wanted the FBI to take him right away. He was returned to Colorado and charged with first-degree murder. He was not able to face the death penalty as the murder did not reach the statute required at the time. To be sentenced to death, the murder either had to be witnessed or the killer had to confess. Even though Joseph had told the FBI that he was their man, he never confessed to killing Ad, and no credible eyewitnesses came forward to say they had seen the murder take place. The case against Joseph was entirely circumstantial. Fingerprint matching existed in those days, but all that was left of Ad were bones. No prints from Joseph were lifted from Ad's body or his vehicle. However, there was evidence Joseph had bought the typewriter and paper used in the ransom note. The typewriter itself was never recovered. Joseph's burnt-out Mercury also proved to be a kind of dusty itinerary for his movements before and after the abduction. When it was examined by the FBI, they found several distinct layers of dirt which matched the unique soil composition at Turkey Creek and the dump site where Ad's body was found. On March 29, 1961, after a 13-day trial, Joseph Corbett Jr. was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. However, less than 20 years later, on December 12, 1980, he was given parole for good behavior and released from prison. He never confessed to any involvement in Ad's murder, but in an interview with the FBI, he gave some insight into how his mother's death had changed him. He said he was guilty about the way she had died because he was meant to have repaired the railing which would have prevented her fall. Then he blamed his stepbrother and father for not telling him he wasn't responsible. That made him decide to move to San Francisco and start a new life, which ultimately led him to commit 2 murders. In 2009, at the age of 80, Joseph ended his life by a single gunshot to the head. Ad wasn't the only victim of Joseph's failed ransom scheme. Mary never recovered from Ad's murder. 4 months after he went missing, Mary sold their dream home and moved back to an upmarket suburb in the Denver city limits. Even after his remains were found, she was unable to have a funeral as his remains were kept as evidence for the trial. Over the coming years, she struggled with alcohol addiction and became increasingly isolated. Her children remember their childhood in 2 distinct parts. The time before their father disappeared when they felt loved and cherished by their parents, and the time after when they felt they had lost them both. Mary died at the age of 62. There were financial implications as well. When Ad died, Adolph cut Mary and his grandchildren off from the family completely. Even though Ad's son was 4th-generation Adolph Coors, he was not entitled to his birthright. The shares in Coors Company which would have become Ad's were divided between his brothers. The Coors family had a habit of cutting off relatives who didn't play by their rules. Joe Coors' oldest son, Joe Jr., was kicked out of the family for getting married before finishing college. Joe himself was later cut off after leaving his wife for a younger woman. At the end of the day, though, however the Coors family treated each other, it was no excuse for a monster to show up and murder one of them based on his own misguided greed. If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave us a comment. You can check out our other show, Somewhere Sinister, on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.